Welcome everyone indeed to this webinar entitled Cities as Frontrunners for Climate Change and Health Protection. This webinar is the third in a series of webinars organized by HEAL around the theme Climate Change and Health in Poland. And today's webinar will, as the title says, focus on the role of cities in addressing climate change and therewith also in protecting public health. At the Health and Environment Alliance, we have focused on the role of cities in various instances in the past, such as when looking at the energy consumption of buildings, for example, and the need to make them more energy efficient in a very strongly urbanizing world. But also when working with dozens of schools across Europe to monitor both indoor and outdoor air quality around schools, as we know that many children are breathing harmful air. We've also been a member of the EU Urban Air Quality Partnership and have provided health expertise to city authorities across Europe, including in Poland. And at this moment, HEAL is furthermore working with partners in 15 European cities to highlight how air quality can be improved in the city context, and especially by changing the way that we move around cities and by focusing on healthy mobility, which means by focusing on walking and cycling, rather than what we see nowadays in cities is that they're usually made for cars and not for people. But there's of course so much more to touch upon here and many ways in which cities are linked to public health and to climate change. So in that sense, I would like to start with our first speaker, who kindly sent us a recorded presentation. Professor Zbigniew Karaczun is professor at the Warsaw University of Life Sciences and an expert for the Polish Climate Coalition. He is the co-author of a report on climate change and health for Warsaw, which was published last year and is the first report of its kind for a Polish city. In his presentation, he will introduce today's topic by talking about the threats from climate change to the health of particularly city residents, and he will also share some thoughts on protection measures. In that sense, enjoy everyone, and we're going to play the video in a moment.
Dzień dobry Państwu, bardzo mi miło, że będę mógł Państwu przedstawić.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure for me to be able to share with you some of the information about the role of cities in the face of the climate crisis. My apologies for not being able to be present in person. Unfortunately, my other obligations made it impossible for me to participate in person. I represent the Coalition for Climate, and its mission is to support collaborative activities to prevent climate change for the benefit of people and the environment. And one of the areas where we try to work are local authorities and cities. Why is that activity of cities and the significance of cities growing in recent years? Because cities are where half of the population of the world lives now. It is suspected that it's going to be over 70% of all the inhabitants of the earth by 2050. Only in China, in the coming 30 years, the number of city dwellers is going to increase by 1 billion people. So this is a huge number, and it's going to be a lot of pressure on the environment. That's going to be also a lot of pressure on the climate. So here you see the blue line. The blue line shows you how quickly the number of inhabitants and of the cities is growing, and relatively more slowly the number of rural areas is changing. It's not growing, it's dropping, in fact. So the proportions are changing, and the role of the cities in environmental protection is going to be on the rise. Since cities and urban areas will bring together a lot of people, this is where business activity is going to be focused as well, and the cities will keep on using more and more energy. Even today, cities use approximately 80 to 90% of energy that we create, but by 2030 that consumption is going to even grow. In the US, it's going to be as much as 87% of all primary energy that is being created in that country. In Oceania, it's going to be 80%, and in the EU, it's going to stay around 75%. Relatively, the highest increase is going to happen in the countries where relatively fewer people nowadays live in the cities, like Asia and Africa, and that's where we would expect the most significant increase in the energy consumption on the urban areas, on the urban in the cities, and this is going to translate into the increased emissions as well. The fact that we are talking about the cities, and it's good to talk about the cities in the context of climate policy, it's a direct result of the fact that cities have a potential that can allow them to be an important player in the climate policy. They have a money potential, the resources potential. 90 cities brought together in the C40 initiative create a GDP of the value of $10.8 billion. If that was a state, if that was a country, that GDP would be greater than China, and it would only be lesser to the United States. Also, the cities bring together intellectual capacity, technical capacity, and technical potential that makes it possible to implement
Kapitał
new
społeczny i tutaj te sygnały
the environment. This is also where the social capital is at. So all the signals that force
na
policy makers to do more area of environmental protection, these forces that
zlokalizowane
act
miasta.
on the businesses as well. This is also localized in the cities, and so the city of the force of all the urban movements manifests that. In the context of climate policy, cities are also important because this is where well, a large proportion of people live, and that proportion is going to grow. All the negative phenomena that will be the result of climate change will affect city dwellers in particular. So in the context of cities and climate policy in particular, we have to bear in mind that that heat waves are going to be particularly noxious to city dwellers. Cities are typically warmer than surrounding areas, so the heat waves are going to be even more harmful. Cities will also be at risk of extreme weather events. They will have to face water deficits or drought, but there will also be another phase of that situation, meaning flooding risk. All that can lead to negative health outcomes, and that's going to affect most strongly inhabitants of the cities. To show you that the climate is in fact changing and that it is not just something that is going to happen in the future, but rather something that is already happening, have a look at the curve of average temperature in Warsaw in the last 70 years. Today, it's over 2 degrees higher than average in the 50s, so back in the 1950s. Let me just remind you that not long ago we forecasted that mean temperature of that kind is going to happen in Poland after 2070. This only proves how quickly climate is changing, and that climate change is accelerating according to IPCC scientists. For instance, since temperature is rising and since more heat is going to be retained in the atmosphere, we are also facing a far greater risk of heat waves in Warsaw or in any other city. I'm talking about Warsaw here because we've got a graph here illustrating by how much the number of days of heat waves is going to be higher, greater. So heat waves of 3 or 5 days. So the graph tells you that the heat waves in the second half of this century is going to reach 30 5 to 43 degrees centigrade. Today we are talking approximately 30 degrees. So the noxiousness of the heat waves is going to be far greater. Extreme weather events, like for instance, hurricane wind. This is also not a matter of the future. This is something that we have already been facing. Here you see a map showing just some of hurricane winds or events of that kind that caused significant material damage or have led to some harm when it comes to human life and health. And you see very clearly that in Poland we do start to have a sort of a hurricane alley that starts at the Warmińsko-Mazurskie province, somewhere in the northeast, around Suwałki, Augustów. Then it passes through central Poland and goes to Małopolska, Silesia, Opole region. A dozen years back, hurricanes or twisters were incidental in Poland. Perhaps they happened once or twice a year. Now, on average, we have 20 a year. 2006 was a record year when we had 52 such extreme events. From the point of view of city dwellers, the real danger is the change in the distribution of rain. Even now, there is much more water coming down in the period of time, which may, well, lead to a risk of a drought, but it may also increase the risk of flooding. This is especially dangerous in the city, which you see here in the photo. You see Łódź. That's a city that is located in a diverse terrain when it comes to its elevation, considering that you have a very large surface area of impervious surfaces of concrete. Water gathers in deeper so areas that leads to flash floods and causes a lot of business damage, but also is dangerous for the health and life of humans, of human beings. How much of a risk is it? You see the example of Ostrołęka here. This is a map of flooding risk for the city, and it shows that nearly the entire right side of the city is at risk of flooding as a result of rain, massive rain. All these phenomena, they are significant because they, at the end of it, they all focus on us, on inhabitants of the cities, and they are manifested as health outcomes, either direct, like sudden deaths, or indirect, because we might be even talking about, well, various injuries, mental health problems. You don't really hear about that in Poland too much, but if extreme situations happen, that damage sometimes causes the damage causes people to lose everything over minutes, and that can cause even PTSD in the future. So, well, unfortunately, it's very hard to gain access to any emotional support in Poland. There are also indirect health outcomes. There is nothing that we could call a climate disease, but climate change increases the risk for human health and life in various ways and forms, directly or more indirectly. So just to show you what the situation is, this is an example of what's happening in Poland. We've got increased risk of vector-borne diseases, for instance, borne by ticks. Lyme disease in Poland, the incidence of Lyme disease is increasing dramatically over the last 15 years, from 2005 until today. The number of cases increased threefold. And it's not just true for Poland. I know that similar data are reported in Scandinavia or in Russia. cities are not free from that risk, and reports from Warsaw prove that, because ticks that were caught in Warsaw parks were analyzed and compared from ticks from Łazienki, from the Kabacki forest, from the Bielański forest, and these were compared with the ticks from natural areas like the Białowieska primeval forest, Campinos primeval forest, and other natural forests. And it turns out that ticks from Warsaw carry many more bacteria causing, for instance, rickettsiosis or neuroehrlichiosis. So these are new disease entities that were proven to be carried by bacteria, carried by ticks. Why is it happening? Because there are fewer predators in the cities. Predators could reduce the population of mice, and mice can be carriers of ticks. The most harmful probably is going to be the increase in the incidence of heat waves. Even now, Hungarian research shows that heat waves cause the increased number of deaths from 1 to 40 per million deaths who are exposed to a specific phenomenon. Data for Warsaw would indicate that if that same scenario happens, the number of 5-day-long heat waves is going to increase 6-fold, and that's going to increase mortality by 200 percentage points, which is going to be very significant, and children, as well as pregnant women and the elderly, are at highest risk. That's why we have to act. That's why cities have to take action. On the one hand, to prevent climate change, on the other, to adapt to it, to adapt to the changes that are already forecasted. So what can we do? Education is key. Protecting the climate is something that we have to make people aware of. Climate protection is key to maintain our high quality of life and our health security. Local authorities, local government should very broadly collaborate with various stakeholders, with the citizens, with industry, or other groups and institutions that are operating within their area of authority. It seems that citizen panels are a good way to create local actions, to promote grassroots effort accepted by the citizens. It's important for all these activities to be planned, to be coordinated, to be conducted within a climate package, because then you can create local priorities, you can ensure proper financing and responsibility. It's also important for the cities to exchange ideas and good practices, because this is something, this is the road to being more effective and efficient. Another important issue is that we have to remember that protecting the climate and reducing greenhouse gases, these are the basic activities that we have to undertake. Why? Because if climate change exceeds a certain threshold, so mean temperature increases more than by 2 degrees, then adapting to the outcomes of that may prove impossible. So what do we do? Energy management, that's something that is absolutely essential. Also managing mobility in the cities, including spatial planning to reduce the needs for transportation. Also waste management is absolutely important, and reducing landfill use, but also providing for solutions that absorb carbon. Two things are key here. On the one hand, cities have to pressure central governments, certain authorities, to make sure that the created legal framework make it possible for the local authorities to effectively work for the environment, but also to make sure that all the protective actions are taken elsewhere as well, outside of the cities. It's also important that cities need new tools in order to influence the citizens, to influence the business owners operating within their area, to force them to take certain actions. and adapting to climate change already happening. Much of that is already happening in Poland. So a city as a sponge. What we mean here is retaining water from rainfall, protecting from floods, a huge role of green areas where people can rest, escape the heat waves, but also increasing albedo, so increasing the number of surfaces, the amount of surfaces that will not reflect sunlight, but so instead of black asphalt, rather white streets, and an idea of a 15-minute city, meaning that each of us within 15 minutes should have access to all the necessary services and to the green areas where you can rest and hide from heat. That would be all on my part. Thank you so much for your attention, and I encourage you to collaborate with the Coalition for Climate. This is my email address and our website. It seems to us that without collaboration, without collaborating with NGOs, business, and local authorities, stopping climate change is not going to be possible, nor is it going to be possible to adapt to its results. Thank you so much.
Great. A big thank you to Professor Karaczun for this great overview, which I think is setting the scene for today's topic and for all the following presentations very, very well. As we cannot ask him any questions, I'll ask you to please keep your thoughts till the discussion round later on. Before we move to our next speaker, I'd like to welcome all those of you who joined a bit later. As you have hopefully seen, we have simultaneous translation available today, English and Polish. For access, please click on the interpretation button in the right corner of your Zoom screen and choose either English or Portuguese, which will end up being Polish, I promise. And if you have any questions, please let us know in the chat box. So let's move on to our next speaker. Dr. Justyna Glusman is the Director of Coordination for Development and Green Spaces in the city of Warsaw. She will present us with examples of the role of local governments when it comes to mitigation and adaptation of climate change. And yeah, the floor is yours, Dr. Glusman.
I'm afraid Dr. Glusman would need to be transferred to the panelist room and be granted access.
Just a moment, please.
Hi, this is Elke. I thought we had put her already. Ah, hello, there she is.
Hi. Some issue with the network today. I'm sorry. I don't know if I can share my presentation, or you can share it from your computer, because I have it on another computer. I had to change one.
Veronica, is it possible, or Jacek?
Możemy jak najbardziej pokazać z naszej strony.
Okay.
Tak, już teraz jest
Yes, we can do that.
Polish. Do you prefer me to speak in English or Polish?
Can be Polish if you wish, of course. Może być jak najbardziej po polsku.
Okay. Dzień dobry Państwu jeszcze raz.
Polish, right. So once again, good afternoon. I would like to say a few words about how cities can what cities can do when it comes to preventing climate change and adapting to climate change on the example of what Warsaw is already doing. So the capital of Poland, if I could see my next slide. Well, as Professor Karaczun already said, implementing these changes, especially those that mitigate further climate change, is essential when it comes to the cities, because first of all, the cities will be the ones on whom the outcomes of these changes are going to focus, and also because of the growing population of the world, the percentage of that population that is going to live in the cities, more and more pollution, more and more emissions are going to be produced by the cities. It is now calculated to be at the level of approximately 70% of global energy emissions. So I'm including here CO2 and other greenhouse gases. So without urgent and very transformative actions of the cities for climate, ensuring secure future and the trajectory of limiting emissions according to the Paris Agreement is not going to be possible. That's why the role of all the decision makers when it comes to creating, developing policies aimed at mitigating climate change, it should all focus on the cities. Also, financing that is going to go for that purpose should be mostly available to the cities, because without the cities, we will not be able to meet those very ambitious goals. The same goes for very active participation of the cities. Without them, the EU is not going to meet the goals of its Green Deal and green transformation. Next slide, please.
The city of Warsaw has been executing two large packages of different actions, which as a matter of fact intersect in different areas. First of all, these are the activities connected to the adaptation to the climate change, and the other package is mitigation of climate change. In 2019, in June, we officially adopted in the City Council the Adapt City strategy, which is a strategy to adapt to climate change on the basis of the diagnosis of the city in the context of climate change and identification of the problems which are the most tedious and hit our city. Here in the maps, you can see that the urban Isle of Heat is in particular the problem that we have to address. But we also have to address the problem of water and lack of water. It's also about torrential rain, driving rain, and the fact that the water goes down to the river and we are not able to retain it sufficiently in the place of a rainfall. So on the one hand, it's about droughts as well as very high temperatures, and Professor Karaczun talked about the consequence of that. On the other hand, it is the whole program of water management. Next, please. And when we go back to the problem of water, this year, we prepared the program for the protection of water resources. This program is made up of 10 main items, which we develop and clarify in details. In practice, we implement those elements of the program that have been already developed. First of all, we want to retain as well as protect areas of natural water retention. The city of Warsaw is a city which is full of different natural factors. The valley of the river, at least on one bank of it, is really very biodiverse. It is Natura 2000, and it's retained in the original condition. We really have to care for that area. But we also have natural water bodies, and we also have the old river bank, and we want to protect it to a greater extent than it has been the case so far. And the city canals that until recently played a role of the drainage, but we want them, especially in the places where there is no flood threat, we want it to be also a list of the retention canals. That is why this year already in the 6 canals we introduced a system of different valves, and we want to develop the system of canals as well as the monitoring of the water level in those canals. We also are applying such techniques as, for example, not mowing the canals as well as their banks for the water not to pour down to the Vistula River so fast. And it's also about the underground water sources. It is another item of that program, which is especially important in the context of security as well as alternative water supply. The mayor of the city 2 weeks ago adopted a decision on the protection of the underground water sources. The city is not allowing them to be closed down now. Those authorities and those institutions on the premises of which the underground water supply sources are, they have to protect them. The tight and waterproof surfaces and fracking. It is quite an ambitious issue, not for all the cities, but cities want to be more environmentally friendly and they want to develop in a sustainable way. That is why it is really very important to retain water in the place where it falls. But our law is very complicated, and very frequently those procedures which allow us to frack the surface, for example, taking off the pavement, those procedures is very complicated and they require different design for the traffic management, and we have to tackle against it. It usually takes months to go through all those formal and legal requirements. At the same time, this task is incredibly important, but because of those procedures, it is also quite costly. Anyways, at a larger scale, we started some actions 2 years ago. Since they have been launched, we have been really continuing them, and we want to have the biologically active surface in the city. We also give subsidies for the retention devices and retention reservoirs for individuals, as well as the housing communities and cooperatives. They can be closed or open reservoirs. About 4 million zlotys have been allocated to this objective. This program is quite popular and it makes us quite happy. We hope that there is going to be an increasing number of institutions that manage any premises in the city will focus on retaining water and using the rainfall. And planning procedures, this is yet another element which is incredibly important for the retention of water as well as the right water management. In this context, what is most important is that developers as well as different authorities and well, the companies that are involved in the developing of new compounds, since the very beginning of the procedure of development had their necessary guidelines and precise guidelines, because they have to be obliged to retain water in the city. They also have to use different elements of the blue and green infrastructure to allow for the retention of water. And here we are talking about the green roofs, green walls, and the different reservoirs and using the right vegetation. I want to add that as a city, we also organize workshops for cooperatives and different communities that are involved in the management of housing areas. We want to use them in a more environmentally friendly way. I mentioned the program for retention of 1,200 applications submitted this year, and it is the subsidy of 4,000 for semi-detached houses and 10,000 zlotys for the cooperatives, and the housing communities is quite popular, and it was implemented last year. It was also very positively received by the inhabitants. Next, please. Getting rid of the concrete. It is an example of getting rid of the concrete in one of the streets. We want to increase the order of magnitude of those actions, not only in the districts, but we also want to do this in the front yards and backyards of housing cooperatives. And this is going to be the language of the resolution of the city that would allow for the co-financing of different green undertakings. Green railway, and this is another action that is going to focus on the track in order to increase the biologically active surface in the city. Green streets. It is a very important project. Well, several dozen streets are going to be made more green. Some of those projects are connected with just adding some trees, planting additional trees, but as with Świętokrzyska Street, quite many of them would require the streets to be totally reconstructed. It would be better for us to execute those projects which do not only add greenery, but also balance of the wrong proportions between different users of the street, which is the pedestrians, cyclists, and drivers. We want to execute those postulates Professor Karaczun mentioned today, which is sustainable mobility. At the same time, we want to create space for the greenery. And we want to increase the space that is taken by the greenery. And a new planning policy. It was mentioned here before, and it's incredibly important in the context of climate change prevention. It is, the fight against the spilling over of the cities. We are having to do here with not really very conducive legal system in the country, but still in Warsaw, there are some areas that would require special protection. One of them is a Wawer River area. We want to protect this area. We want to protect this as a natural retention terrain where we can see a great diversity of nature. It could serve the purpose of recreation, environmental education. Unfortunately, the property is in private hands, and the adoption of the plan would require investment from the city. It would require the consent for the possible compensation to be paid out to the owners of the property. Unfortunately, when nature protection tackles against different financial capacities, we do hope that we will still be able to save this area, because it is the largest natural concentration of different types of vegetation and the largest natural retention reservoir, which would allow us to create the region of the city that would act like a sponge. Well, a long time ago, it used to be a swamp, and it's quite a swampy area. And we know that from the climate perspective, it is a especially valuable area. When we move on to mitigation, which is the prevention of climate change, here it is incredibly important for the cities to reduce emissions, greenhouse emissions. By 2020, the city of Warsaw wanted to attain the objective connected with the 20% of CO2 emissions reduction and CO2 equivalent, decreasing by 20% the energy demand and achieving 20% of energy generation from renewable energies. Unfortunately, those plans did not come true. One of the reasons for the failure is the fact that in terms of heat and power generation plant, the investment projects which were supposed to be implemented were not implemented, and we hope that we will be able to catch up with those plans, and we will do this. But we are also now getting ready for the adoption of the new climate action plan, which in Warsaw is going to be executed in cooperation with the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development under the program for the development of a green city. The Green City Action Plan is going to be created in 2018. The previous authorities of the city of Warsaw committed themselves to reduce greenhouse gases emissions by 40% by 2030. And this plan is going to present this objective, but I want to say quite openly that we keep talking about climate neutrality more and more, as also in the context of different debates taking place in the European Forum. This plan is going to be implemented also together with the C40 Cities organization, which associates the most progressive cities in the context of climate change, and C40 Cities is going to care for that part. Which is going to focus on the preparation of scenarios for the CO2 reduction. So today we have those objectives, but we do not have specific scenarios of CO2 reductions. I think that in October, we will organize the first large meeting with the participation of the stakeholders, and we want to launch it. We want to inform the inhabitants about what is going to happen, and we are going to proceed.
You have 2 more
Preparation is
minutes,
going to be quite
please.
inclusive.
Thank you. 2 more minutes.
Jeszcze 2 minuty, and everyone is going to be prepared. Can I use the second slide? Yeah, the next slide. This is the breakdown of the emissions from the perspective of the sources of acid transport, waste, and heat, the main sources of emissions. And here examples of investment from the perspective of the sustainable mobility, electric buses, the second largest acquisition projects in Europe, and we are expanding also the paid parking zone and higher penalties for wrong parking, new parking lots, as well as the area of green transport prepared. So those are the main programs executed by the city of Warsaw. We also provide subsidies for renewable energies, and against all the appearances, it is also an important action from the perspective of the reduction of the greenhouse gases. This is an important set of data from the perspective of photovoltaic panels and wind farms. There is a growing interest of inhabitants with these projects. And this is the program of doing away with the coal-based furnaces. It's 300 million. It is a huge amount that is devoted to the fight against the smog. And this slide, I wanted to show to you, the fight against the smog does not only bring the cleaner air due to the reduction of dust particles, but we also are focusing on renewable energies. The highest subsidies are granted where the replacement of the coal-fueled furnace is replaced by the environmentally friendly, as for example, the heat pump with photovoltaic panels, and then we reduce down to 0 the CO2 emissions produced by those 2 types of devices. We are also getting prepared for the replacement of 42,000 city lamps. And it is also a program which is going to bring huge savings in terms of the CO2 reduction, but also saving of energy consumption, as well as the cost of energy supply for the street lamps in the city. And also climate panel. This is the program that I wanted to present at the end. The objective of the panel is the preparation of the recommendations in terms of increasing energy efficiency, as well as the development of renewable energies. Now we're getting prepared for the launch of the panel. We hope that it's going to begin at the end of October. This program serves not only the purpose of developing a specific recommendation, but it is also done for the purpose of the promotion of subjects which is connected with the greenhouse gases emissions, and as well as the necessity to adapt, as well as save energy for a greater group of citizens. The very presence of this subject in the media, I believe, will make it closer to the inhabitants as well as journalists, and it will be easier also to introduce changes which are more controversial, and they are not as obvious as those that were mentioned by me earlier. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Glusman. Very interesting to hear how much is going on in the city. Before I open the floor to questions from the audience, and please feel free to send us your question if you have any via the chat box in either Polish or English is fine. What I'm wondering, if I may ask a question, you did say at the beginning that you are organizing workshops for cooperatives and others involved in housing, etc. So I'd like to ask, is there a way to involve, or has there been a way to involve health authorities, the health sector in any form or way in any of the activities you presented? Can you maybe tell us a little bit about if there's been that focus or that approach?
Znaczy my koncentrowaliśmy się na tym, żeby przedstawić
We were
spółdzielniom
focused on the presentation to the cooperatives as well as the communities, different possibilities how to manage space around the buildings in such a way so that it could be good for the adaptation to climate change due to the increase of biologically active surface. We were showing the outcomes and the importance of the rearrangement of the space. And here I would see the possibility of the involvement of different experts in the area of healthcare, engaging them because they would be able to place a greater pressure on this aspect. Why we are thinking about it at all, to rearrange urban spaces which are ready. One subject is to talk with the developers. We are getting prepared for that, and we would like to organize also a workshop for developers. And it would not necessarily have to be financed from the city budget, but a lot of space in our city is not public space per se, but this space is managed by different cooperatives and housing communities. So our diagnosis is that if we do not convince those entities, we are not going to be able to achieve the objectives we want to achieve. So I would really see here some space to cooperate. Our program slowed down now because we were not meeting because of the pandemic. So since March, those meetings have not been taking place, but we would like to go back to them.
Of course. Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
We will move on to our next speaker. If there's any question to Dr. Glusman, please keep it until the end of the presentations when we can ask her again. Now then, let's move on. Our next speaker is Aleksandra Zienkiewicz. She is the Public Relations Coordinator of the Urban Green Areas Management Board of the city of Wrocław. She will share very specific examples of actions taken by the city's Green Areas Management Boards in connection to climate change. The floor is yours.
Dzień dobry, bardzo dziękuję.
Good afternoon, thank you very much. I would like to share my screen with you. Trying to do this now. Excellent, done.
Slajdów, okej. Dobrze, tak więc ja nie będę mówić o całym Wrocławiu.
So I'm not going to talk about the whole city, but as a representative of the City Green Board, I would like to focus on the actions that we take up on everyday basis. So let us start on a general note. So let us start with something that we already discussed today. Climate change is more and more visible, and its importance is growing for the activity of the city authorities. In this slide, you can find data that comes from our plan of adaptation to climate change. In Poland, on average, temperature goes up by 0.24 degrees per 10 years, while in Wrocław, this temperature goes up by almost 0.5 degree per 10 years. In terms of maximum temperature is concerned, it is over 0.7 degree per 10 years. So those differences are very much visible for all of us. Obviously, together with those changes, the number of very hot days also goes up. Heat waves occur more frequently, and they persist for a longer period. It is more problematic when we see that there is additional heating up of the city because of the city heat aisle. That is why different activities connected with the green areas are very important. It's also very important to develop new green areas. It's been already said what those disturbances of the climate take us to. So I'm not going to revisit the subject, but it's worthwhile saying that as far as those extreme phenomena are concerned, heat waves in particular, those who are most susceptible are such people as elderly citizens, people who are diseased, people with disabilities, people who are homeless, children, as well as pregnant women. That is why it is very important to take up activities. Now I would like to present to you a short presentation of different research results which can show to us that climate change is seen by the people in Poland. In Lower Silesia, the results are higher than the average result for Poland. I am quite sorry that Wrocław, unfortunately, had to take the mean result down, because people who live in Wrocław, 33% of the inhabitants of Wrocław say that climate change is one of the most important threats for the contemporary civilization. So talking about our actions taken up every day, connected with the maintenance of the situation, we introduced the system, the change of the system of mowing city loans. It is already the second year of quite comprehensive change to this extent. We mow lawns not that frequently. We do it only in parts of the lawns, usually along the pavements. Part of the terrain is now devoted to extensive mowing only once or twice a year. Thanks to that, we have a chance for the development of spontaneous city lawns and ecosystems that are close to natural or semi-natural ecosystems. We know that a lawn, or actually the meadow, can be created only when there is no mowing. And this is an example of a city meadow in one of the hills in Wrocław. There were some controversies connected with that hill because it is used largely for recreational purposes, but we decided to follow the path that the top of that hill can be mowed on a regular basis for people to play ball and to spend picnic time there, but the slopes are not mowed, and we are making sure that along the paths the grass is mowed for people to have no difficulty to pass through. Because of those controversies, we commissioned an expert opinion in which scientists in the area of ornithology, botanics, and etymology presented their conclusions concerning what happened on the top of the hill in connection with the decision to give up frequent mowing. You can see what happened. Insects, pollinating insects, birds. It's a great habitat for them. That is why we continue our actions. We also establish meadows with flowers. That is connected with the enrichment of the urban space, also from the visual perspective, to improve aesthetics. But thanks to this, we are also increasing the food base for pollinating insects. These are examples coming from the city. Those meadows have been established since 2019. Some of them are only with one species, but most of them are with many species. And we keep verifying all the time how well they are doing and which solutions are better. In which areas, which mixtures of different seeds give the best performance. As far as the activities in autumn are concerned, we limited the raking of the leaves. We keep leaves there in order to fertilize the soil and infrastructure. It is important, especially in wintertime, because this cushion of leaves decreases the changes of the temperature of soil. It is quite important when there is no snow, and snow is not that frequent, and if it even comes, it disappears very fast, and it also decreases the vaporizing from the soil. In order to increase safety, we rake trees, we rake leaves off the paths, and also lanes. And we also make sure that we protect trees from insects that are a pest. Since last year, there has been a ban on using the blowing machines. Our contractors can use only manually handled devices like regular rakes. And we decided to do that because of the fact that those blowing machines create noise. And they also lead to the clouds of dust, and they also emit CO2 because they use energy. One of the most important things that are managed by the City Green Board is supplementing vegetation in the terrains that are managed by us. 2.5 up to 3,000 trees are planted annually, and almost 60,000 of different shrubs are also planted by us every year. We plant those trees in accordance with the parameters that are issued by the decision of the mayor of the city on the protection of trees as well as the development of green areas. These parameters are as follows. Those trees are quite large. They are all over 3 meters tall, and the circumference is 18 centimeters if they are planted along the street. In parks, they can be a little smaller because then they have better conditions for development and they grow faster. We also plant such vegetation, and we want to increase the green surface and the activity of vegetation, that is to capture dust and other pollutions, as well as limit vaporization. Here in this picture, or in these pictures, we can see very well developed greenery. We planted on fences, barriers, poles, acoustic screens, as well as the bus stops. The scale is not really very large, but there is a communication between city authorities as well as the Board for Greenery. And I am sure that there will be more of that this year. In spring, for the first time, we had the whole task in the tender for the new plants. And that task was connected with the procurement of such plants all over the city. New vegetation came up. In one of the pictures, you can see young vegetation. And we are continuing this, and in the years to come, we want to continue the task. Together with the trees and with the shrubs, we also are going to plant this.
Now over to our investment tasks. For instance, among what we do, we try to create less impervious surfaces. So you see Bocheński Square here, how it was revitalized. Asphalt was turned into gravel. Additionally, you hear some new plants, new vegetation planted. The entire square had an overall lifting sort of done. We were assisted here by an investor who built an office building on the other side of the square. So this is one of our ideas of how to increase the amount of resources that we can spend on green areas in Wrocław. So we collaborate with the investors. On the right, you see a square that was created after roads were rearranged in the area. The majority of that area was used by the cars. It was a rather large intersection, but then we created a sort of a tiny little square. Right now we have 2 locations there where we planted rose bushes, a couple of trees. You don't really see that here, but we do have 2 larger trees planted in these newly reclaimed areas. And these are some further examples of similar activities undertaken by us. For instance, in the bottom photo, you see the rain garden in the street where there was a problem with water retention. So this is how we solved it, since there was an investment happening right next to it. Also an example of a green parking lot. In the middle, in the upper row, there is one of our latest investments. This is a square in Bernardyńska Street, where for many years It was partially a square and partially an office parking lot, an office building parking lot, and this entire area now was reclaimed by the citizens. Now we do have a lot of greenery, additional plants, more trees. So the balance is very much in favor here. And the last example is also one of our latest investments in Ostrów Tumski. This is also changing the imperviousness of the pavement. You've got clover in between stone on the pavement. So this is how it changed. Another activity that we undertake is getting rid of unofficial parking lots, because they do not only commandeer surface area, the land, which also means that water retention is becoming a problem. Some of this water is collected, gathers on the partially paved surface. This is where we collaborated with the board of this specific neighborhood around the parking lot. This entire area was also reclaimed by the citizens. We added benches, pathways to provide for optimum communication in between the areas. You've got new plantings, a flower meadow on part of it. Added
2 more
added
minutes,
some
please.
trees,
2 more minutes. Thank you.
just some trees, as I said, because this is unfortunately still an area where a road construction is being planned. However, things are changing, everything is on the move, so perhaps our plans as regards this area are going to change as well. And this is one of my final slides. Well, it's very important to have trees in the city. They are important for nature, obviously, but also because they sequester CO2. And this is why we have the ordinance by our mayor. On the one hand, it obligates us to plant trees wherever trees are being cut down. If for some reason trees have to be replanted elsewhere, then the ratio for calculation is much higher. So we have to plant more trees than you cut down if you replant them further from the cut down site. Also, we want to protect trees when they are mostly at risk, meaning during investment processes. And this is why that document includes an annex regarding various conditions on dealing with trees in the course of any investment. All municipal entities, as well as all entities that are doing road work or investments in the vicinity of roads, they have to comply by it. It doesn't always work. However, we are doing our best to make sure that things improve, because the mature trees, these are the ones that are most valuable, most important, and they really do what we hope for them to do. So this is one of the priorities for Wrocław and our Green Area Board. Well, I could show you a video, but we are running out of time and this is a fairly long video. So if you want to see it, you will be able to see it once we send our presentation over. And for now, this is all on my part. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Aleksandra. I think that's a great idea. We do have a question that came in through the chat box, which I would like to pose to you. So someone is asking, how much urban green area is sufficient and necessary for making cities healthy and climate safe? Can you comment on that maybe?
To jest do mnie pytanie.
Is that a question to me specifically? Or?
It is a question that others could also answer if you feel we should postpone it to the discussion. Fair enough. Would you prefer that?
Mogę powiedzieć, że oczywiście, znaczy inaczej, w tym
I
momencie
can
nie
only
mam.
say for now, well, I don't have data right now to confirm a specific surface area, a given number. But however, it is obvious, the more green area you have, the more retention you can provide, the better. During another conference not long ago, I heard that a very important indicator is the coverage with tree branches. 40-something% should be of the city area should be covered by a canopy of the trees. So a canopy should cover 40-something% of the city area. So I think this is more or less the indicator that should be our target, because trees bring a lot of benefits with them. Shade is one of them, and this is key during heat waves, very hot days. So it's very important to have as many trees as we can.
Thank you very much. I'd like to move us then to our next speaker. If you have any more questions for Aleksandra, please keep them for later on. We're now going to take a little excursion over to the Netherlands to hear from Rob Maas. Rob Maas is Senior Scientific Advisor on Integrated Environmental Assessments at the National Institute for Public Health and the Environment in the Netherlands. And he will share with us some good practice on climate and health from Dutch cities. The floor is yours.
Thank you. One moment.
Take your time.
Now it must be okay.
Yes, looks good.
Yeah, but this is not the first slide. This is the first slide. Okay, thank you. I will talk about the integrated assessment of climate and air quality policies. And the focus is on the Netherlands, but although I have a lot of experience also with urban practices in the European Union and in the United Nations. Below you see 3 pictures, and to the left is the restoration of the medieval canal that was just finished last week. In the 1960s, one decided to build a highway of 8 lanes into the city, because the idea at that time was that people should be able to enter the city center by car. And this is now outdated. The current policy is to have as little as possible cars into the city, and Utrecht is now becoming the biking capital of Europe, I can say. So it makes no sense to go by car into the city, because you cannot leave it anywhere. The city is now what you can call a 15-minute city. Every services can be reached within 15 minutes. Is this solving all the problems? No, it is not sufficient to bring down climate change or have the cleanest air possible in Utrecht, because Utrecht is in the crossroads of all major highways in the Netherlands. So the highways policies belong to the national government, and the air quality within Utrecht is very much dependent on what is happening on the highways that are going around the city. So it is one example that a cooperation between government layers is needed to reach the ultimate goal, and of course also cooperation within the European scale or the global scale when you talk about climate effects. There are different or various political drivers for taking actions towards sustainable and healthy cities. I have presented a few of them here. Some cities want to be climate neutral, so get rid of the fossil fuels as much as possible. This will automatically also lead to cleaner air, because if you remove the fossil fuels, you have less emissions of greenhouse gases, but also less emissions of air pollutants, such as primary particles and NOx. So by taking this action, you will also have an improvement of health. Other cities say, well, we want to be circular. Never mind, this will also help by reducing greenhouse gases. And if the circular economy, the so-called donut city, will also make sure that you get all your materials from the regions just around the city. Then it will also make cause less transport. If your food is coming from the neighborhood, then it can also help by getting a more healthy diet. So it will also contribute to health. Some cities, as we have seen in the previous presentations, want to be green because they want to reduce, for instance, heat stress. So this will also help by improving health. It can also help to stimulate people to walk more, to cycle more. And if this is combined with, for instance, digital assistance by choosing the most cleanest route and the best available options for transport, then it can also stimulate people to have a more active mobility. So this can also reduce obesity, for instance. So you can see that these different goals can all help to move towards a more sustainable and healthy situation. What is most important? Well, in the Netherlands, we estimate that about 10,000 people, 10,000 deaths can be attributed to air pollution every year. Heat stress is much less. We estimate that a few hundred people are victim of heat stress every year. So there is still a lot to say to work on the reduction of air pollution. Smart cities, more active mobility can in fact be very important, because the number of people that prematurely die from obesity is even more than the people that die prematurely from air quality. This is a cross-section of a typical city. You must have seen this picture before, I guess. What it shows is that there are certain busy streets where the air quality is quite bad and where the emission limit values are exceeded. The cause of these peaks is mainly traffic. Then there is the average exposure of the people, the background concentration of the city, that is amongst other influenced by residential heating and things like that. And then the background is partly also influenced by emissions outside the city or even outside the country. And what we can see in this picture, that especially for the bulk of the background concentration, industry and secondary particles are very important. The secondary particles consist of the reaction of ammonia from agriculture with NOx from traffic and SO2 from industry. And if you want to reach, for instance, the WHO guideline values for air quality, then it isn't insufficient to only focus on traffic. You should also look at these other sources. And this is a typical picture, and in the urban PM2.5 atlas of the GRC, you can find specific data for at least 14 Polish cities. What is needed to meet the WHO guidelines? This is the same picture, but then in another form. If we focus on Poland, this is the breakdown of the concentration in a typical Polish city. Then the peak concentrations are mainly caused by the traffic emissions. The large part of the background concentrations in Polish cities is caused by residential heating. This is much more than what you compare it with, for instance, Netherlands or Germany. And that is for all countries the case, the national and international contribution comes from the secondary particles. That is the ammonium nitrate and ammonium sulfate. And the conclusion from this picture is that if you want to meet the WHO guideline value, the pink line here, then only taking measures within a city is not sufficient. You should also look at other sources, look at further reduction of sulfur from energy use, from ammonia, from agriculture, to really bring down the concentrations towards this WHO guideline value. So we need, in fact, a cooperation across spatial scales, a cooperation between different government layers to work on cleaner air. And of course, this is also true for climate change, even more, because the greenhouse gases are distributed evenly over the world. If you look at these different layers, you can conclude that there are cost-effective measures possible at all these scales. At a global scale, you can, for instance, tackle shipping and air traffic. At the EU level, there are effective measures. No, where is it gone again? Yeah, effective measures to set ceilings on certain installations or national emissions, and you can define carbon commitments. You can reduce the use of fossil fuels. At the city scale, you can, for instance, think about taxes and subsidies and the energy and transport planning, the infrastructure. Local cities can do a lot on permitting, on city planning. We have already heard a number of examples here. And you can install the low emission zones that can ban the old vehicles from the city and promote public transport. So at each layer you have a typical instrument you can apply, but only when you cooperate you can really reach your targets on climate and on clean air. And an example of this is the cooperation in the Netherlands between national, regional and local authorities, which led to a national clean air agreement in 2019, and it was signed by mayors and by ministers. The aim was to have a continuous reduction of health risks from air pollution, meeting the WHO guidelines by 2030. It was a follow-up of the National Cooperative Program to meet the EU limit values. So this was finished by now, and the targets were met, more or less. It builds upon the energy and climate plan that was simultaneously agreed by the government and stakeholders. It aims at implementing the existing EU regulation, but it also adds some national and local measures. And an important instrument was also financial and knowledge supports to local authorities and periodical assessments by RIVM. And last but not least, it also involves the public, for instance, via citizens' measurements. And I must say that this is quite important to increase the pressure on the whole process, because if you look back at this picture, most of the pressure, most of the incentives to take actions comes from the local level, and often local authorities think that not enough is done at the national or at the European level. So the energy, the political energy that comes from the local level is quite important. And you can, for instance, see this by different various initiatives. The Covenant of Mayors we have on climate policies, and the Eurocities actions on clean air. Oops, there it goes. Sorry, start again. Yes, here I was. The whole agreement aims at drastically improving air quality in the Netherlands. And you can see two maps of the Netherlands here, situation for 2016 and 2030. And the 2030 situation is then with the new policies. The darkest colors shows areas where almost more than a year of the life expectancy is lost due to air pollution, and the cleaner areas here in the 2030 maps shows areas where it is less than 4 months. So there is a fast improvement, not everywhere. There will still be relatively higher concentrations in the city centers, but that is then at least reduced to around 8 months. And if you look at those distributions, you can see that the people with the highest health risks in 2016 are more or less now, there is the problem more or less solved. So here the highest health risk is a loss of 9 months in 2030, while it was more than 13 months in 2016. So this is a visual illustration of the plan. Of course, there is always a debate, what are the best indicators to look at? Some people favor the premature deaths, or the number of life years lost, or the chance that children get bronchitis. So with the tools that the impact assessment tools, you can more or less quantify different indicators, and different policymakers might want to focus on different indicators. Economists always wants to know, and what will it cost? So for each measures, we calculated the benefit cost ratio of measures. For instance, what is the ban? What will be the ban on old wood stoves? What will it cost? What will it deliver? Well, simply an illustration. The main lessons. There appears to be a strong political willingness at the local scale to take action, and cities want, in fact, more actions to be taken at the national and European level. The citizens' involvement is a very important driver for the whole process. In air pollution and also in climate, the focus is still very much on traffic and local transport planning, while there is now an increasing awareness that we also need an active diplomacy to reduce emissions in the surrounding countries. And then there is a paradox, because there is a lot of public support for ineffective measures, such as green walls or catalytic paints to reduce NO2 concentrations, but in fact they are quite ineffective. And there is opposition against the effective measures like road pricing, scrapping of old cars, scrapping of old wood stoves, reduction of air traffic, and reduction of cattle. The picture here in the right bottom side is not an agricultural exhibition, but it is a protest close to our institute, because we dared to say that most of the ammonia problems was caused by cattle. The last lesson is that there is a tension, there can be a tension between climate and health policy. I will pick out two examples. The use of biomass for district heating is now a discussion point. Climate people would like to see this as a part of the package, and health people say, well, this will not improve health or not improve the air quality. And especially after the COVID-19 situation, we realized that there can be a tension between insulations of buildings versus indoor air quality. If there is not enough ventilation, then viruses and also other elements that worsen the air quality indoors can be increased. So these 2 points are still with us. Okay, these were some lessons I would like to share with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for giving us some insights into how the issue is dealt with in the Netherlands. I would like to ask you a question, as we do not have a question from the audience for you yet. Namely, as an institute for public health and environment, you are of course always working with both sides of the narrative, which you also touched upon multiple times. Can you maybe say a bit more on how the health sector specifically is being involved in such projects, or maybe give us a successful example of how the health engagement has been going on the local level?
It takes a lot of energy.
Can you elaborate a little bit? I'm sure we're curious.
Yeah. It's not only health, but you see that we have now organized things so that climate is in another department, air pollution is in another department, health is there, agriculture and nature are in different departments. So you need really people that walk around and try to combine things. Strangely enough, the Ministry of Finance stood up and said, well, let's sit together with all these ministries. And they more or less also dragged the Ministry of Health into the discussions, because in their view, the cost-benefit ratio of measures was a very important thing. So we had also to calculate health benefits. So this, these economists from the financial department were really helpful in bringing everyone together. And I must say that also the cabinet of the Prime Minister was important, because if there is no support from the supreme leader, then nothing will happen. Then everyone will do its own business.
Okay, great, thank you. So even when everyone is under one roof, it's still sometimes tricky to communicate, it seems.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Well, especially when you have to work at home, then it is even more difficult if you can't meet people at the coffee machine.
Absolutely, thank you so much.
Okay.
Before we open the floor to discussions, we have one more speaker for today. Our final speaker is Dariusz Szwed, who is the chair of the Program Council of the Green Institute and an expert on sustainable development. He will end our talks today with an answer to the question of how citizens can be involved in activities for clean air and climate neutrality. Please go ahead. Can you? Yep.
Oops. Can you see my?
We can see you and we can hear you perfectly. We cannot see your presentation yet.
Ah, you can't see the presentation yet. Okay. Is it okay now?
Yeah, I think it's coming. Just a moment. Yes, now we can see it. Perfect. Go ahead.
Super. Super. I will speak English, Polish, as I was asked for. Rob powiedział wiele ciekawych rzeczy na temat
Rob said many interesting things about a political perspective of climate change, but also climate policy, climate urban policy. Well, as a matter of fact, this is the subject that I wanted to touch, because in my opinion, as Dr. Glusman said, it is very important to have the social support to be successful. The attitude of the people is very important to the performance of our activities for the change to be introduced. And I would like to share with you experiences that I have collected in recent years while I was supporting the cities in the execution of their climate policy or transport/energy policy in a more narrow sense, because we have some experiences collected, and I believe that for other European cities, they can be quite interesting. That is why I would like to ask a question where this road to the participatory, inclusive policy can take us to be successful. The first thing is that I'm writing here about, well, I wrote energy transformation, but we can say it as climate transformation. We keep hearing about the decarbonization of energy sector, decarbonization of transport, our cities, but it's simply getting rid of fossil fuels. But in my opinion, and it is also confirmed by the experience of the most progressive cities, it is incredibly important to put the same stress to two other elements of the transformation. It is democratic nature as well as decentralization. What it means is, in the case of energy, but also in the case of water, as we heard from the presentation from the city of Warsaw and from the city of Wrocław, decentralization of the water system means that people start producing their own water in a way, because they retain water in their own setups, in their own environment, whether it is a building or a condo or a park nearby. And this is how we lead to decentralization of the system of water management but we also make it more democratic. Our citizens become co-owners of the system, whether we are talking about water system or energy system. This is the moment when we can raise a very popular but still quite new category of prosumers. Prosumers are people, citizens, individuals who are at the same time consumers of public services, services that are provided by the city, but this individual can also become a producer of such services for themselves. For example, they can produce their own energy, or they can collect their own water, but by means of public activity of individuals and creating communities, let us say energy communities, we can make sure that those individuals become the shareholders of the city. Smart city concept is based on smart citizens. So there is no smart city without citizens who also act in a smart way for their own good as well as for their own interest, which is quite obvious from the liberal perspective. But they also have to act for the common good and common services the city offers to them as well as to other citizens. However, it is very important to make sure that the category of prosumer should be treated not very narrowly as individual prosumers, which is taking place today. For example, in the energy sector, we are experiencing here the boom of energy prosumers, solar prosumers. Within a few months, hundreds of thousands of people became solar prosumers all over Poland. But we want to treat this attitude as a democratic new quality. Prosumers can also be the whole compounds, enterprises, companies, establishments, city authorities, but the whole city can also become a prosumer. The city of Warsaw can be a prosumer. Krakow can also be a prosumer. It is incredibly important for us to treat this attitude as a totally new quality of our attitude to the co-creation of inclusive participatory climate policy of the city. To do this, it is very helpful to have the framework European program, which is called Clean Energy for All the Europeans 2030. It is a dynamic program, and as you know, it keeps changing. The last bullet point here says that at least 30% of European funds is going to be dedicated to decarbonization and climate change. Well, it used to be 25%, so we can see that it is changing. The dynamics is visible, and we can see very clearly that climate policy of the city is starting to place an even more important place in the European policy, as well as the European Green Deal. And I would propose to do this also at the urban level, whether it is the municipal Green Deal or Warsaw Green Deal or Krakow Green Deal or Wrocław Green Deal. We can say that there is no European Green Deal without those European ingredients, without individual European cities. The European Green Deal is going to be made up by green deals in individual cities as well as in non-urban areas. And look at what the priorities are. An absolute priority of the program is energy efficiency. But we can also say that, first of all, it is about the efficiency of how the city operates. Rob was very correct when he said that there is interaction here between different areas of city policy. Increasing energy efficiency improves also efficiency of the healthcare system. Increasing the transport efficiency improves the efficiency of the operation of the city system as such. it limits time waste of the inhabitants. Well, by the way, if you allow me, I would like to share a small anecdote with you. For 4 weeks, not long ago, I spent I was for some time in the political capital of the Netherlands, which is The Hague. I was there, it was my private business. And for 4 weeks, it happened only once that I was honked at a street by a car, and I was really a great cyclist there. I cycled a lot. I have to stress it because I'm really crazy about cycling. I'm a freak. I'm a cycling freak. And that was a car with the registration plates showing that it is a Polish car. So it is just showing, although I don't want to state it very openly, that Poles are not environmentally friendly and the Dutch people are environmentally friendly. But it is incredibly important to educate people, to involve the whole city community in our climate policy. It is quite visible here that the European Union is presenting those frameworks to us, for example, by means of the development of the national plans of the energy as well as climate. The same energy and climate policy can be created by the municipalities, by the cities. It is very important also to increase the rights for consumers, prosumers, as well as citizens, just citizens who in a more efficient as well as more smart way can participate in the process of climate transformation. It is also about the priorities which the European Union introduces to its political framework, but financial framework, and I would like to move on to this in a moment. And this is an objective one of the Polish cities has recently adopted. Krakow announced that it would be trying to act for climate neutrality by 2030. It is a very fast track, 10 years. 10 years is the time it is allowing itself to act in order to be an energy neutral city. It is important whether it's going to be successful, we will see. But it's important to note that the cities are starting to announce aggressive as well as progressive climate objectives, like climate neutrality. Dr. Glusman also mentioned that in the city of Warsaw, climate neutrality is also coming up in the political debate in the city council. For the time being, it is done in the context of 2050. It is important for this discussion to be moving towards achieving climate neutrality. But let me stress once again, there is no climate neutrality, in my opinion, if it is not inclusive and if it is not really participatory for other entities. In the discussion, there is a question coming up about the time and inclusion. There is a dilemma here, how much of the inclusion of the people should be done and how much time we have at our disposal. One can say that the inclusive processes take more time. The idea that I wanted to state is that the lack of inclusion of the people will take away time from us, but it is going to happen a little bit later when the people are going to riot against the policy that we want to pursue. And the people will then block our policy. That is why saving time and the inclusive process stage will simply waste the time which is apparently only saved at the very beginning. We will waste this time later on when the policy adopted by the city council is contested by the inhabitants of the city. It is incredibly important for the policy introduced by the city to be totally received, accepted, and welcomed by the inhabitants. And you can see this very clearly on the example of the Polish cities. Let us go back to the positive change. There is no question that, especially in large cities in Poland, we can see, regardless of too low pressure exerted on the efficiency, but we can still see that people realize it is good for them. That is why climate policy is also friendly for the pockets of people who live in the cities. The policy does not have to be very aggressive. The people see themselves that thanks to the energy efficiency, I'm here talking about, for example, electrical energy efficiency, they are able to bear financial benefits. But in quite many cases, there is a conflict. A very good example of that is renewable energy. Until recently, it was so expensive that many people decided not to go that way because they simply were not able to afford it. And it frequently happened that the subsidies were taken up by people who are better off, and people who are excluded, people who are deprived, people who were hit by energy poverty were not really able to use it, and they were even getting more and more energy excluded. That is a very bad way, because this way leads to social unrest, protests of people who are excluded, and even, as it is taking place in Poland, it leads to the development of political populism, when some political parties are taking advantage of the disadvantaged social groups to rebel them against the so-called expensive transformation. It doesn't have to be expensive if it is inclusive and effective as well as efficient. And this is a very practical example. It is incredibly important. You may say that everyone can put a light bulb in your home, and you can simply replace your
2 more
light
minutes,
bulb
please.
with energy
2 more
efficient light
minutes.
bulb.
Thank you.
I made some calculations for the city of Starachowice. In the city of Starachowice, the savings resulting from the replacement of the light bulbs for LED bulbs, public space, not private space, is 15 to 17 million zlotys. This is huge money, and this money can simply be kept in the pockets of the citizens. And by this, the citizens are becoming more positive, and they are more supportive of climate transformation. Why to save? Because the transformation towards renewable energy fully, which is also the right 100% of a renewable energy is going to be cheaper for everyone. This is an example which I was able to execute together with the mayor of the city of Słupsk, Robert Biedroń. This used to be a house of people who were excluded, people who were homeless. This is the Society of Help after Brother Albert. And thanks to this energy efficiency, we are going to decrease the energy demand by 50%, and the remaining 50% they are going to cover thanks to the savings as well as the acquisition of their own installations. You can see that installation on the rooftop. And this is how one of the poorest institutions in the city is going to become not only decarbonized, but also self-sufficient from the energy perspective. And finally, to conclude, I would like to present to you some postulates, and that they show how energy efficiency can be achieved by the development of energy communities, which are supported by the European Union. And the European Union does not support fossil fuels, and I would like to stress it. It means that the changes that can take place in the city can also be supported by, for example, European funds, but also the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development, which is going to be done, by the way, by the city of Warsaw. And the benefits that can be drawn by the citizens, as Rob said, as well as Dr. Glusman said, as well as other people who spoke today said, well, I don't want to repeat that. And finally, this is the last picture I want to share with you what it can be like. Instead of a power block, we are managing distributed energy, and this is how we are able to create the urban virtual power plant. How to fund it? Look at it. Our own resources from the revolving fund, which means that the funds that are saved thanks to the energy efficiency, we reinvest it in the subsequent climate-friendly investments, but also our own environmental protection funds from the regional level, or the regional operational program. And it is also important funds coming from the emission auctions. And this is billions of zlotys held by the government. And this is the money the cities should get for the execution of the progressive and inclusive climate policy. Thank you very much indeed for your attention. Well, sorry for too detailed information from time to time, but I believe, and let me conclude, that power to the people means that well, power, knowledge, or energy taken by the people, energy democracy, climate democracy is, in my opinion, the key to the success in the implementation of the inclusive climate policy. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I think this was a great ending to our presentations, ending with, you know, focusing and prioritizing the very people living in the spaces we want and must change for the sake of climate and health. Thank you all very much. I would like to open the discussion for the final 10 to 15 minutes that we have. We've covered quite a bit today, from health impacts to the most pressing issues in cities, as well as heard a number of examples of projects done by cities in this field. We've had many examples on how to increase green spaces, but also now, as we've heard, how to involve citizens. Now, I'd like to open the floor to questions, both to our last speaker as well as to all speakers combined. Again, please post them in the chat box. And also to our speakers, feel free to also ask each other questions. So that is encouraged as well. While we wait for questions to come in, I would like to maybe take the chance to touch upon one thing that's maybe timely, because I feel we kind of have to touch upon it. As you all know, the COVID pandemic has drastically changed everyday life for many, many people. And many people agree that the pandemic is making it more urgent than ever to act on climate change. One of the reasons is that protecting our natural environment is the only way to go if we want to minimize the risks for future pandemics, as data seems to be showing increasingly. But do you, and I mean all of you, whoever wants to maybe comment on that, do you also think that everyday citizens are more likely to care, to approve, or even to push for climate and health measures in their cities as a result of COVID?
I can
go ahead, please.
I think it is having an impact on the mindset of the citizens, the pandemic, especially when we all realize the need for public spaces, for greenery. And in fact, the pandemic has hit the most people in the city centers. And the whole question of the compact city and the idea of compact city has to be redeveloped, actually, in context of the new circumstances that we found ourselves in. At the same time, I believe that the concept of self-sufficiency and the prosumery as well has gained a political importance and importance in people's mind, as we see that there might occur circumstances when we are not able to rely on our governments, on the public authorities. So I see that the pandemic will speed up some of the changes. And it's actually the time which some cities in the world have used for changing the development paradigms, shifting the development paradigms, and with more focus on public space, on mobility and sustainable mobility. You see what have London or Paris done was extremely impressive from my perspective. We are not in Central Eastern Europe that courageous yet, but I believe we are following the track, and sooner or later these changes will come. But I totally agree with Dariusz, who spoke before about the inclusiveness and the awareness of citizens about the meaning of these changes. I deeply believe that if we not succeed in explaining why these changes are happening, why we are actually making them, we are not going to get the social support, and what follows, we are not going to get the political support, as every politician is calculating at city and national, at whichever level, which will be the end of the game, what will personally these actions bring for the politicians. And as long as he sees the game, she or he gains from these measures, is going to implement them. So definitely I agree with that notion that we need to explain people and to show people, and that's the primary obligation. Otherwise we won't move. Also, just to think about shift of money from one action to another action, it's always controversial, it always requires explanation. we have to have a good reason for that, and that reason needs to be understood by our audience.
Thank you. I think Dariusz, you wanted to come in? Yeah.
Yeah, just shortly. If disparity, economic disparity levels increase over the pandemic, then the trust of people to any public institutions will decrease, which is unfortunately a case in Central and Eastern Europe to some extent, because there is a lot of fake information which is spread around about health, about climate, about pandemic nowadays. And I think what is really crucial is that we combine climate and equality of people, economic egalitarian agenda into our mainstream discussions. I think if we cut those two, then we will have a lot of populism, a lot of, I would say, Trumps and others around. So that's why this is really important, that we learn or find out the way to reunite people around the pandemic, because a lot of people feel left behind, left to take care for themselves. So I think I'm economist by the profession, but I'm ecologist by my mindset. But I think that we really have to redefine economy, also the city economy, to include everyone, so that no one is left behind. Otherwise, we will have really a lot of kind of counter activities of different populistic movement.
Rob, do you have anything to add here, maybe?
Yes, personally, I hope that the pandemic will change, it will improve the situation, but I also fear that it goes the other way. There are also signs that people start stopping belief in science, both when it is about the virus and also about climate. So the challenge is, how can we solve this in a democratic society? It is easier in a technocratic society, but we have learned that if experts say, well, you have to abandon your diesel car, and then you get yellow vest protests everywhere. So we need public support. Personally, I think we had some nice experiences by involving more and more people in doing the measurements, the air quality measurements, or doing the weather, the personal weather stations measurements. So people are more educated and know more about the problem, and that might work. You don't need everyone to join. You need at least a majority, but it means that we need to take complaints of people serious, that we need to know that for some measures, some people have to pay, and they will start opposing the policies. And that is both the poor side, but also the big industries. They will also oppose it. So it will always be a matter of give and take, and see how you can create a majority to make a step forward. And it will be different.
We did in fact have a question from someone on this as well, who asks, why is power to the people more important than strong leadership? And who quotes the example of China, for example, where the transformation to renewables has been done without too much bottom-up democracy. So any thoughts on that? I mean, we're talking about climate disaster potentially, so the urgency is there. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, well, I think we should stick to democracy. It is making it much more difficult, I agree, but it's I wouldn't like to live in China, so it's no, freedom is also important.
I think Dariusz, you wanted to add something to that question.
Yeah, exactly what Rob said. It's that, of course, we can say climate or democracy, but this is the wrong way, especially here in Europe, where we really believe that European values, that our freedoms for the last few hundred years. We built on them a lot of important developments. Of course, we have to redefine growth in general. There is no growth anymore. I mean, pandemic shows that there is no unconditional growth because we are in a very limited environment, global environment, and it shows. And we can't put all the burdens outside of Europe, which we did for many years. So there is a need for solidarity, but of course I understand this notion of democracy or climate, because we can see China being successful on one side, but then, well, who knows what the system, global system, political system will be in 20, 30 years. I wouldn't even start this discussion now because we would probably need another 2 or 3 hours to discuss it. But this is very important point. Yes, climate and democracy, or climate without democracy. Yes.
Great. I don't know if Aleksandra or you, Justyna, still want to have a word on this
just
issue?
one sentence.
Yes.
I do agree with my predecessors. I don't think we are standing in front of a dilemma between climate and democracy. What is important is to educate and to let people know what I've said before about the goals of the policies being implemented. We are not China, and we're not going to become China. I mean, China is not an option. I mean, the system is basically based on other values, as Dariusz said, and it's not going to change very easily. We are believers in freedom. It's I do not believe it's an option to give it away in any way, apart from one finishing with a bloodshed. But what is important is to give, and the question was about the leadership, and it's exactly leadership about, is to give, provide the purpose, explain the steps. And it's not an incident that Western cities have given up cars to such an extent without a social revolution. Why has it happened over there? Why cannot happen in Central Eastern Europe in such a such similar manner yet? Yeah. It's just a question of maturity, social trust in political leaders, and quality of leaders themselves.
Perfect. I think that was a great way to end this round. I would like to thank you all so very much. It's been very interesting. I think we've had a great group of people here, and we would like to close this webinar as we're nearing an end. I've been giving over to my colleague Anne to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Vijoleta. And I'd first like to thank very much on behalf of our speakers here for your presentations. In this webinar series, we've covered in past webinars, if you want the broad issue. And I think today I very much like that we boiled it down. We looked at the city level at what actually our health professionals and us as citizens can do, where we should be engaged on changing the immediate surroundings where we live. So thank you very much for that. And I think we've identified opportunities and ways where our health professional audience can further engage on. And I'm also happy that today we could do more of sharing between Poland and the Netherlands, and this is part of the aim of this webinar series as well, that we connect people and share on good practice. I would also like to thank my colleague Vijoleta for the moderation today, and also all of the HEAL team involved in this effort. I'd like to thank our translators. Thank you very much. We couldn't do it without you. And also I want to invite you to our next 2 webinars. We have a webinar next week for a Polish audience where you can ask your doctor. So we're inviting citizens, residents to ask any questions, any concerns they have on climate change and health. And then in October, we'll have a concluding webinar where we want to talk more about the measures, the policy opportunities that we see for climate and health. And